Marcus Thompson had exactly 12 seconds to make a choice. Through the smoke and twisted metal of the private jet sinking into the icy river, he could see her, a woman in a business suit, trapped, water rising fast. He didn't know she was Elena Martinez, CEO of a billion-dollar empire. He just knew she was drowning. Marcus dove in. What he pulled from that wreckage would change his life forever, but not in the way you think. Because 3 mornings later, when those black SUVs rolled up to his rundown apartment, Marcus had no idea whether he'd saved an angel or made a deal with the devil himself. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and also let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. Some moments split your life into before and after. For Marcus Thompson, that moment came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, aboard the Staten Island ferry, holding his 7-year-old daughter's hand. The sky was that perfect September blue, the kind that makes you forget winter's coming. Zoe was laughing, pointing at seagulls, her braids bouncing as the ferry cut through the Hudson River. Marcus smiled, watching her. These ferry rides were their thing. Free entertainment for a father whose wallet was always lighter than he'd like. He didn't know that in 60 seconds, everything would change. The sound came first. A mechanical scream, metal tearing against physics. Passengers looked up. There, maybe 200 yards out, a private jet was falling from the sky. Not crashing. Falling. Like a bird with broken wings, spiraling, helpless. It hit the water with a violence that made grown men gasp. The impact sent a geyser of white foam 30 feet high. Then, silence. The kind that comes right before chaos. Someone screamed. Then everyone screamed. Passengers rushed to the railing, phones out, recording, watching. The jet's nose was already going under, the tail section pointing toward heaven like a desperate prayer. Marcus felt Zoe's small hand squeezing his. She was crying. He knelt down, looked into her eyes. Behind him, people were shouting about calling 911, about how far away the Coast Guard was. Marcus saw something else. Through the shattered cockpit window, movement. Someone was alive in there. Someone was drowning. His heart made the decision before his brain could argue. He turned to the woman next to him, a stranger with kind eyes. He placed Zoe's hand in hers and said 5 words that would haunt him. Hold her. I'll be right back. He had no idea that dive would cost him everything he loved. Marcus hit the water hard. The cold knocked the air from his lungs, but he didn't surface. He dove deeper, pulling himself down toward the sinking jet with strokes that burned his shoulders. The Hudson was murky, thick with sediment and oil, turning everything into a greenish-brown fog. He could barely see 3 feet ahead. His chest was already screaming for oxygen, but he pushed through, following the dark shape of the fuselage as it tilted forward, dragging itself toward the river bottom. Then he saw her. Through the spider-webbed remains of a window, a woman in a cream-colored business suit, slumped in her seat. Water was pouring in from somewhere, already up to her chest, rising fast. Her head lolled to one side, unconscious. Marcus didn't think. He squeezed through the jagged opening, feeling metal teeth scrape his arms. Inside the cabin, everything was sideways. Luggage floated past him like ghosts. Papers swirled in the current. He reached her, grabbed her face, shook her. Nothing. No response. Her seatbelt was jammed, twisted from the impact. Marcus yanked at it, his fingers clumsy and desperate. It wouldn't budge. The water was at her neck now. He looked around, frantic, and saw a piece of torn metal, sharp enough. He grabbed it, started sawing at the belt. The metal bit into his palm, splitting skin, turning the water around his hand dark with blood. He didn't feel it. The jet groaned, a deep mechanical moan, and suddenly shifted. The nose dropped another 10 degrees. Marcus's stomach lurched. They were sinking faster. The woman's face was underwater now, her hair floating around her like seaweed. The seatbelt finally gave way. Marcus grabbed her under the arms, kicked off the seat, and pulled her toward the opening. His lungs were fire. His vision was narrowing. He squeezed them both through the window, feeling more metal bite into his shoulder, and kicked toward the light above. The surface looked impossibly far away. His body was shutting down, demanding air, threatening to inhale water. Just a little more. Just a little more. His head broke the surface and he gasped, sucking in air like a drowning man, because that's exactly what he was. He pulled the woman up beside him, her face pale, her lips blue. She wasn't breathing. The ferry crew pulled them onto the deck. Marcus laid the woman flat, tilted her head back, and started compressions. 30 pumps, hard and fast against her sternum. 2 rescue breaths. Her chest rose and fell, but she didn't respond. Around him, a circle of passengers stood watching, phone cameras pointed at him like accusing fingers, recording everything. Someone was narrating for their social media. Marcus didn't care. He kept going. 30 more compressions. His arms were shaking. 2 more breaths. Come on. Come on. Then she convulsed. Water erupted from her mouth. River water mixed with something darker. She rolled onto her side, coughing, gasping, alive. The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus just sat back on his heels, his whole body trembling. He was bleeding from his hand and shoulder, his clothes plastered to his skin. The woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, confused. She looked at Marcus like she was trying to remember something from a dream. Her voice came out raw, barely a whisper. "Thank you. Who are you?" Marcus helped her sit up slowly. "Just someone who was in the right place," he said. Sirens were wailing now, getting closer. The ferry was heading back to dock early, an emergency diversion. Paramedics would be waiting. Marcus stood, his legs unsteady, and pushed through the crowd. He found Zoe exactly where he'd left her, still holding the kind woman's hand, her face streaked with tears. "Daddy!" She crashed into him, wrapping her small arms around his waist. He held her tight, kissed the top of her head, whispered that he was okay, that everything was okay. Behind them, paramedics were loading the woman onto a stretcher, asking her questions, checking her vitals. In the water, floating among debris, a torn leather briefcase drifted past, expensive and ruined, its contents spilling into the Hudson. No one noticed it. No one thought it mattered. Marcus thought that was goodbye. He was wrong. By the time Marcus got home that evening, his 15 minutes of fame were already burning through the internet. But Marcus Thompson's reality didn't change because of viral videos. He still lived in a 4th-floor walk-up in Brownsville, Brooklyn, where the hallways smelled like cigarettes and boiled cabbage, where sirens were the neighborhood lullaby. The eviction notice was still taped to his door, bright orange and impossible to ignore. $2,400 past due. 3 days to pay or vacate. He pulled it down before Zoe could see it and unlocked the 3 deadbolts that stood between his family and a world that had already taken too much from them. Marcus Thompson became a single father 3 years ago when cancer stole his wife, Sarah. She fought for 18 months, and in those 18 months, medical bills devoured their savings, their credit, their future. When she died, Marcus was left with a 7-year-old daughter, a mountain of debt, and a choice: survive or surrender. He chose survival. That meant construction work from 6 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, then driving for Uber until midnight. 7 days a week. It meant mac and cheese for dinner 4 nights out of 7. It meant telling Zoe that her 9th birthday party next week would be small, just the 2 of them, because Daddy couldn't afford the trampoline place her friends were going to. That night, Marcus microwaved leftover Chinese food and collapsed onto their secondhand couch. The local news was playing, and there he was, grainy phone footage of him diving into the Hudson, pulling a woman from the wreckage, performing CPR. The anchor's voice was breathless with excitement. The woman he saved was Elena Martinez, CEO of Martinez Global Industries, one of the wealthiest self-made women in America. Her company was worth billions. Marcus stared at the screen for a moment, then picked up the remote. "Good for her," he said to no one in particular, and changed the channel to cartoons. Zoe climbed onto the couch beside him, her small body fitting perfectly under his arm. She'd been quiet since the ferry, processing what she'd seen. Now she looked up at him with those wide brown eyes that were so much like her mother's at hurt. "Dad," she asked softly, "are you a superhero now?" Marcus kissed her forehead and smiled, the kind of tired smile that father's perfect. "No, baby," he said, "just your dad." But in a glass tower 30 miles away, Elena Martinez was making phone calls. And Marcus Thompson's name was at the top of her list. 3 days after the rescue, Marcus woke up at 5:45 in the morning like he always did. His alarm hadn't gone off yet, but his body didn't need it anymore. Years of exhaustion had trained him to function on autopilot. He dragged himself out of bed, his shoulders still aching from where the jet's metal had bit into him, and shuffled to the kitchen to start coffee. The apartment was quiet. Zoe wouldn't be up for another hour. Marcus moved through the darkness by memory, knowing exactly where every creaky floorboard waited to betray him. He poured water into the machine, pressed the button, and walked to the window while it gurgled to life. That's when he saw them. 3 black Escalades, parked in a perfect line on his street. Brand new, gleaming even in the weak pre-dawn light. They looked like they'd been airlifted from another dimension, a dimension where people didn't triple lock their car doors and pray nobody slashed their tires overnight. Marcus's stomach dropped. His first thought was cops. His second thought was worse. FBI. Immigration. Someone was in trouble, and people like him, people from neighborhoods like this, those were the people who got caught in the crossfire. He watched, frozen, as 6 people emerged from the vehicles. 3 men, 3 women, all wearing dark suits that probably cost more than his monthly rent. They moved with purpose, scanning the building, checking phones, conferring with each other like a tactical unit. Then they started walking toward his building entrance. Marcus's heart was hammering. He thought about Zoe, still sleeping in the next room. He thought about the eviction notice he'd hidden in his sock drawer. He thought about every worst-case scenario his exhausted brain could manufacture. The knock came exactly 2 minutes later. 3 firm raps, professional, patient. Marcus looked through the peephole. A Chinese man in his 50s stood front and center, holding a leather portfolio. Behind him, the others waited in formation. Marcus's hands were shaking as he undid the deadbolts. He opened the door 6 inches, keeping the chain latched. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, the kind of smile that was meant to be reassuring but somehow made everything more unsettling. "Mr. Thompson?" "I'm Richard Chun, Chief Counsel for Martinez Global Industries. Ms. Martinez would like to thank you properly for saving her life." He extended a hand through the gap. And it was a cream-colored envelope, heavy stock, expensive. Marcus stared at it like it might explode. He unlatched the chain with numb fingers, took the envelope. Richard Chin kept smiling. "Go ahead," he said gently. "Open it." Marcus opened it. Inside was a check. The number made his hands shake. Comment, "I'd be terrified if you'd be scared of mysterious suits showing up at your door. Because sometimes, when billionaires come calling, kindness gets complicated." $100,000. The number was typed in clean, professional font, impossible to misread. Marcus had never seen that many zeros on a piece of paper with his name on it. Below the amount, in elegant handwriting, a note. "This is just the beginning." Marcus looked up at Richard Chun, his mouth dry. I can't accept this." Richard's expression didn't change. "Ms. Martinez wants to meet with you. Today. There's more." Marcus felt the walls of his tiny apartment closing in. "More what?" "I don't want anything. I just did what anyone would do." Richard tilted his head slightly, like he was studying a fascinating specimen. "She insists, Mr. Thompson. The car will wait as long as necessary." Marcus stood there in his doorway, holding a check that could erase his debts, could buy Zoe the birthday party she deserved, could maybe let him sleep for the first time in 3 years. Behind him, he heard Zoe stirring, the soft sound of her feet hitting the floor. He made a decision he'd questioned for months. "Give me 20 minutes. Richard nodded and descended the stairs without another word. Marcus closed the door and leaned against it, his legs suddenly unreliable. He called his construction foreman, a man named Bobby who'd never once heard Marcus call in sick. "Bobby, I can't make it today. Family emergency." The lie tasted wrong in his mouth. Bobby was silent for a moment, then said okay, but Marcus heard the disappointment through the phone. He woke Mrs. Patterson, his neighbor, a 72-year-old Jamaican woman who'd known Sarah and loved Zoe like her own granddaughter. She came over in her bathrobe, took one look at Marcus's face, and asked no questions. Just kissed Zoe goodbye and told Marcus to be careful. "Those fancy people," she said quietly at the door, "they don't do nothing for free. Remember that." Marcus nodded, but he was already walking down the stairs, already climbing into the back of an Escalade that smelled like leather and money. The ride to Manhattan took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Marcus sat in the back, alone, watching Brooklyn turn into the financial district through tinted windows. The driver didn't speak. Soft classical music played through hidden speakers. Everything was climate-controlled, soundproofed, insulated from the real world Marcus knew. He felt like an astronaut being transported to another planet. His work boots looked obscene against the pristine floor mats. His calloused hands felt like weapons he needed to hide. These people lived in a different universe, one where $100,000 checks were just the beginning, where SUVs waited however long necessary, where construction workers got summoned like subjects before a queen. What Marcus didn't know was that Elena Martinez never did anything without a reason. And that $100,000? That was just the test. The elevator to the 60th floor moved so smoothly Marcus barely felt it. When the doors opened, he stepped into a world of floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, and silence so complete it felt sacred. A young woman in a charcoal suit greeted him, led him through corridors lined with abstract art that probably cost more than his entire building, and stopped at a set of double doors. She knocked once, opened them, and gestured for Marcus to enter. Then she disappeared, and Marcus was alone with Elena Martinez. She stood by the windows, backlit by the Manhattan skyline, and for a moment Marcus saw her the way the world saw her. Powerful, untouchable, a woman who'd built an empire from nothing. Then she turned, and he saw something else. Gratitude, raw and real. She crossed the room quickly, not like a CEO approaching an employee, but like a human being approaching a miracle. Mr. Thompson. Marcus, thank you for coming. She extended her hand and Marcus shook it, feeling ridiculous in his work clothes, his boots leaving faint marks on her perfect floor. Please sit. They sat across from each other in leather chairs that probably cost more than his car. Elena didn't waste time with small talk. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his, and spoke with an intensity that made Marcus forget to breathe. You gave me my life back. I have 2 children, Marcus. A daughter who's 12 and a son who's 9. Because of you, they still have a mother. Because of you, I got to tuck them in last night and tell them I love them. How do you thank someone for that? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, I appreciate this, but anyone would have done it. Elena's expression hardened just slightly. But they didn't. You did. There were 200 people on that ferry. You were the only one who jumped. That means something. That means everything. And I want to change your life the way you changed mine. Before Marcus could protest, she continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone used to making decisions that moved millions of dollars. I've had my team look into your situation. I know about your wife. I know about your daughter. I know you're 3 days from eviction and working yourself to death trying to survive. I want to fix that. She slid a folder across the table. Marcus opened it with trembling hands. Inside were documents, official and overwhelming. Elena narrated as he read. Full scholarship for Zoe. Private school starting this fall, all the way through college. Whatever university she chooses, tuition paid in full. Marcus's vision blurred. Elena kept going. $500,000, lump sum payment, deposited in an account I've already opened in your name. A position here at Martinez Global as an executive consultant. $250,000 annual salary, full benefits, pension, the works. And a penthouse apartment in Manhattan, rent-free, as long as you work for me. All of it starts today if you say yes. Marcus couldn't speak. The numbers were impossible. The offer was impossible. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not to construction workers from Brownsville. Elena watched him, patient, letting the weight of it settle. Finally, Marcus found his voice. This is too much. I can't accept this. Elena tilted her head. Why not? You saved my life. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, trying to find the trap he knew had to be hiding somewhere. Because people don't just give away this kind of money. What's the catch? Something shifted in Elena's expression. It was subtle, just a flicker, like a mask slipping for half a second before being adjusted. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but somehow colder. There's no catch, Marcus. Just loyalty. That word, loyalty, hung in the air like a threat dressed as a gift. Elena gave Marcus 48 hours to decide. The ride back to Brooklyn felt longer than the ride there, like he was traveling between 2 different versions of his life and couldn't figure out which one was real. When the SUV pulled up to his building, Mrs. Patterson was waiting on the stoop with Zoe, playing hand-clap games to pass the time. Marcus thanked the driver, stepped out onto concrete that suddenly felt less solid than it had that morning, and walked toward them like a man returning from war. Mrs. Patterson took one look at his face and sent Zoe upstairs to watch cartoons. Then she folded her arms and waited. Marcus told her everything. The check, the offer, the penthouse, the scholarship, the job. He laid it all out like evidence at a trial, waiting for her verdict. Mrs. Patterson listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with every word. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly. Baby, rich people don't do nothing for free. My mama always said, free cheese only in a mousetrap. You hear me? Free cheese only in a mousetrap. That night, after microwave spaghetti and helping Zoe with her homework, Marcus stood in her doorway watching her sleep. She looked so small in her twin bed, surrounded by stuffed animals that Sarah had bought her before she got too sick to shop. Her nightlight cast soft shadows across her face, and Marcus felt his chest tighten. He could give her everything. Everything his wife had wanted for her. The good school Sarah had researched while lying in that hospital bed, too weak to hold the laptop, but refusing to stop planning for a future she'd never see. The college fund they'd started and then had to drain from medical bills. The life, the real life, that every parent wants for their child, but so few can actually provide. All of it was sitting in a folder on his kitchen table, waiting for a signature. But something felt wrong. Marcus couldn't name it, couldn't point to it, but it was there, persistent as a toothache. After Zoe's breathing deepened into sleep, he grabbed his laptop and started searching. Elena Martinez. The results were overwhelming. Forbes articles about her meteoric rise. Business journals praising her innovation. But Marcus kept digging, past the glossy profiles, into the darker corners. There he found the lawsuits. Former employees claiming hostile work environments, sudden terminations, ironclad non-disclosure agreements that kept people silent. He found an article from a business magazine describing her management style as ruthless, her loyalty demands as absolute. One unnamed former executive was quoted saying, "She doesn't hire employees, she collects people. Once you're in her orbit, you don't leave. You belong to her." Marcus closed the laptop, his hands shaking. He thought about that word she'd used. Loyalty. He thought about Mrs. Patterson's warning. Free cheese in a mousetrap. He thought about how desperately he needed this. How much it would change everything. How impossible it would be to say no. Marcus was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. And the worst part? He knew it. On his television, muted in the background, the local news replayed footage of the crash. There, floating in the water among the debris, was a torn designer briefcase, its contents spilling into the Hudson, secrets dissolving into the current. Marcus called Richard Chun the next morning. His voice was steady when he said the words, but his hands weren't. "I accept." There was a pause on the other end, then Richard's measured response. "Excellent decision, Mr. Thompson. We'll have movers at your apartment tomorrow at 9. Your new life starts now." And just like that, it did. The next 2 weeks were a blur of impossible things becoming real. Marcus and Zoe moved into a penthouse in Tribeca with views of the Hudson River, the same river where everything had changed. The apartment had 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Zoe ran through the rooms laughing, her voice echoing off the high ceilings, claiming the biggest bedroom as her own. Marcus stood in the kitchen with marble countertops and appliances he didn't know how to use, feeling like an imposter in someone else's dream. The first night, he couldn't sleep. The mattress was too soft. The silence was too complete. He missed the sirens. Zoe started at Pemberton Academy, a private school on the Upper East Side where tuition cost more than Marcus used to make in a year. He walked her to the entrance that first morning, watched her disappear into a building with columns and ivy, surrounded by children whose parents arrived in town cars. She turned back once, gave him a nervous smile, and Marcus's heart broke and soared at the same time. His first day at Martinez Global was equally surreal. He was given an office on the 42nd floor, a title he barely understood, executive consultant for community initiatives, and a salary that made him nauseous when he saw it in writing. People smiled at him in the hallways, called him by name, treated him like he belonged there. But Marcus knew better. He was a construction worker wearing a borrowed suit, playing a role he hadn't auditioned for. For the first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. Too perfect. Marcus bought Zoe things he'd only been able to promise before. New clothes, books, a laptop for homework, art supplies that actually worked. He took her to restaurants where they didn't have to check the prices first. She laughed more than she had in 3 years, real laughing, the kind that comes from a place deeper than temporary happiness. One night, watching her draw at the dining table, Marcus felt something he'd forgotten existed. Hope. For the first time since Sarah died, he could breathe without his chest hurting. But then he started noticing things. The security cameras were everywhere in the penthouse. In the hallway, the living room, even pointed at the front door. When Marcus asked the building manager about them, the man smiled and said it was for his protection, courtesy of Ms. Martinez. His key card for Martinez Global logged every room he entered, every elevator he took, every minute he spent anywhere in the building. It felt less like security and more like surveillance. And then there were the texts from Elena. They came at odd hours. 2 in the morning, just checking in. Hope you're settling in well. Sunday afternoon, thinking about our conversation. You're adjusting nicely. They were friendly, casual even, but they arrived with a frequency that felt deliberate, like she was reminding him that she was always there, always watching, always aware. If you've ever felt like something good was too good to be true, hit like. Because Marcus was about to learn that every gift from the powerful comes with invisible strings attached. 2 months into his new life, Elena called Marcus to her office. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Marcus had been reviewing community outreach proposals, work that felt almost real, almost purposeful. Her assistant appeared at his door with that same practiced smile everyone at Martinez Global seemed to wear. Ms. Martinez would like to see you. Now, please. The walk to the 60th floor felt longer than it should have. When Marcus entered, Elena was standing by those same windows, looking out at a city she seemed to own. She turned, and her expression was different than before. Less warm, more focused. Marcus, thank you for coming. I need a favor. The word favor landed like a stone in Marcus's stomach. Elena gestured for him to sit, but she remained standing, a power move Marcus recognized even if he'd never had a name for it. She explained it simply, clinically, like she was describing a business transaction. She was involved in a lawsuit with a former business partner named David Kellerman. He was alleging that she'd stolen proprietary technology when they'd dissolved their partnership 5 years ago. The case was headed to trial in 6 weeks. It was messy, expensive, and damaging her reputation. She needed it to go away, and Marcus could help make that happen. Marcus listened, confused. I don't understand. How could I possibly help with a lawsuit? Elena's smile was thin. I need you to testify that you overheard David Kellerman threatening me. On the ferry, the day of the crash. You were there, Marcus. You saw how upset I was before the jet even went down. You heard him on the phone, making threats, saying he'd destroy me if I didn't pay him off. It would be your word, your character, your hero status against his desperation. The jury would believe you. Marcus felt the room tilt. But I've never met this person. I didn't hear anything like that. I was with my daughter. We were looking at seagulls. Elena's expression didn't change. You don't have to have met him. You just have to say you did. On that ferry. Before the crash. It's simple, Marcus. You tell the truth as I'm giving it to you, and this goes away. David Kellerman goes away. And you continue to live this beautiful life I've given you. The words hung between them like smoke. Marcus stood up slowly, his legs unsteady. You want me to lie? You want me to commit perjury? Elena's mask dropped. Not completely, but enough. Her voice went cold, clinical, the warmth draining out of it like water from a cracked glass. I want you to be loyal, Marcus. Like you said you would be. Remember? In this office, 2 months ago, when I asked what mattered to you, you said loyalty. Well, now I'm asking you to prove it. Marcus felt sick. This isn't loyalty. This is fraud. Elena walked toward him, and suddenly she seemed taller, more dangerous, like a predator who'd been playing with prey and was done pretending. Let me tell you something, Marcus. Something I should have told you from the beginning. That day of the crash? That wasn't the first time I saw you. Marcus's blood went cold. What? Elena circled him slowly, her voice measured and precise. I saw you 3 weeks before the crash, at a construction site in Queens. You were working, pouring concrete, and I was there meeting with the developer. I watched you interact with your crew. Honest, hardworking, clearly struggling. I had you researched. Single father, widowed, drowning in medical debt, 2 jobs, facing eviction. Desperate, but also honorable. The kind of man who'd jump into a river to save a stranger. The kind of man people trust. The kind of man a jury would believe. Marcus couldn't breathe. The jet crash, she continued, was a happy coincidence. Mechanical failure, pilot error, wrong place at the right time. But I was already planning to save you, Marcus. By letting you save me. I just didn't know it would be quite so literal. She smiled, and it was the coldest thing Marcus had ever seen. You were perfect. You still are. Desperate enough to accept my offer, honorable enough to be credible, and now, indebted enough to do what I ask. Everything Marcus thought was real was designed. And now he was trapped. Marcus looked Elena Martinez in the eye and said the only thing he could say. No, I won't do it. I won't lie for you. Elena's expression went flat, emotionless, like she'd flipped a switch and turned off whatever humanity she'd been performing. Then I suppose we have a problem, Marcus. She walked back to her desk, sat down, and opened her laptop like he'd already ceased to exist. You can see yourself out. The next day, everything fell apart. Marcus got the call at 10 in the morning. It was the headmaster at Pemberton Academy, his voice professionally apologetic but final. "Mr. Thompson, I'm afraid we're going to have to ask that Zoe be withdrawn from our institution, effective immediately." Marcus's heart stopped. What? Why? What happened? The headmaster cleared his throat. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the specific circumstances, but the decision has been made at the highest level of our board. You'll receive formal documentation by the end of the day." Marcus tried to argue, tried to demand answers, but the line went dead. An hour later, his supervisor at Martinez Global appeared at his office door with the same apologetic smile Marcus was learning to hate. "We're restructuring your position. You'll be transitioning to facilities support. Mailroom. Starting Monday. The salary, of course, will be adjusted accordingly." Marcus sat in his office that wasn't his office anymore, staring at his hands, the same hands that had pulled a woman from a sinking jet and saved her life. Then his phone rang again. A lawyer, professional and detached. "Mr. Thompson, I'm calling on behalf of Martinez Global Industries. Ms. Martinez is formally requesting the return of all gifts provided to you under the employment agreement, per contract clause 47B. You have 72 hours to vacate the penthouse and return all monetary compensation." Marcus ended the call and pulled out the contract he'd signed 2 months ago, the contract he'd barely read because he'd been too overwhelmed, too desperate, too grateful. He found it on page 17, buried in dense legal language that he'd needed a magnifying glass to read. The recipient agrees to provide testimony, consultation, and cooperation as needed in any legal matters involving the donor or donors' affiliated entities. Failure to comply constitutes breach of contract and requires immediate return of all compensation and benefits. He'd signed away his integrity without even knowing it. Marcus sat there in his office with its view of Manhattan, surrounded by furniture that had never been his, wearing a suit that had always been a costume, and he broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way a man breaks when he realizes he's lost a fight he didn't know he was in. He called Mrs. Patterson from the stairwell because he couldn't risk anyone hearing him cry. She listened to everything, and when he finished, her voice was sad but not surprised. "I told you, baby. Cheese in a mousetrap. Free cheese in a mousetrap." Marcus had 2 choices: become a liar for a billionaire, or lose everything again. But there was a third option he hadn't considered yet. Marcus requested one final meeting with Elena Martinez. Richard Chun tried to block it, said Ms. Martinez was extremely busy, had nothing further to discuss. But Marcus insisted, and something in his voice must have intrigued her because 2 hours later he was back in that 60th floor office, standing across from the woman who'd orchestrated his rise and fall like a puppet master tired of her toy. Elena didn't offer him a seat this time. She stood behind her desk, arms crossed, waiting. Marcus took a breath and said the words he'd rehearsed 100 times. "I'll testify, but not the way you want." Elena's eyebrow raised, amused. "Oh, and how exactly will you testify, Marcus?" He met her gaze without flinching. "I'll tell the truth, the whole truth, about how you manipulated me, researched me, targeted me, about how you asked me to commit perjury, about how you've been punishing me for refusing. I'll say it all, under oath, in open court. Let the jury decide who to believe." For a moment, Elena just stared at him. Then she laughed. Actually laughed, the sound sharp and genuinely entertained. "Marcus, do you have any idea how naive that sounds? You think anyone will believe you? I'm Elena Martinez. You're Marcus Thompson. I built $1 billion company from nothing. You pour concrete for a living. Who has more credibility? Who has more to lose?" She walked around her desk, closing the distance between them. "You have no proof. It's your word against mine. And my word is worth considerably more." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He pressed play. Elena's voice filled the room, crystal clear, damning. "You don't have to have met him. You just have to say you did. On that ferry. Before the crash." Her face went pale, then red. Marcus stopped the recording. "New York is a one-party consent state. This recording is legally admissible. I didn't come here for your permission, Elena. I came here to tell you I'm done being afraid of you." Elena's mask shattered completely. Her voice dropped to something dangerous, barely controlled. "You'll lose everything. The apartment, the money, your daughter's future. I will destroy you, Marcus. Systematically. Completely. You'll wish you drowned in that river." Marcus felt something shift inside him, something that had been bent finally straightening. Maybe I will lose everything. Maybe you do have more power than me. But I have something you'll never have. I can still look my daughter in the eye. I can still tell her that when it mattered, her father chose what was right over what was easy. Can you say that to your children? He turned and walked toward the door. Elena's voice followed him, sharp and furious. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. Marcus stopped at the threshold, looked back one last time. No, he said quietly. The biggest mistake of my life was trusting you. Then he walked out, leaving Elena Martinez alone in her tower, surrounded by everything she'd built and nothing she could truly keep. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in a courtroom, his hand on a Bible, swearing to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, legal observers, Martinez global employees ordered to attend, and David Kellerman's legal team, all waiting to see what Marcus Thompson would say. Elena sat at the defendant's table in a navy suit that cost more than most people's cars, her expression carved from ice. Her lawyers flanked her like sentries, confident, prepared, certain that this construction worker wouldn't have the courage to go through with whatever threat he'd made. They were wrong. Marcus took the stand, his hand trembling slightly as it rested on the Bible. He wore his only suit, the one he'd bought for Sarah's funeral, the one that didn't quite fit anymore. The judge asked him to state his name for the record. Marcus Thompson. His voice was steady. Elena's lawyer began the questioning, gentle at first, establishing that Marcus had saved Elena's life, that he was a hero, that she'd offered him compensation out of gratitude. Yes to all of it. Then the trap. And Ms. Martinez asked you to testify today about overhearing Mr. Kellerman threaten her on the ferry, correct? Marcus looked at Elena. She stared back, daring him. He turned to the jury. No, that's not what happened. The courtroom went silent. Elena's lawyer froze. Excuse me? Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. Ms. Martinez asked me to lie. She asked me to testify that I overheard David Kellerman threatening her on the Staten Island ferry before her jet crashed. But I never heard any such thing. I never met David Kellerman. I was there with my daughter, and the only thing I heard was her laughing at seagulls before everything went wrong. The courtroom erupted. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Elena's lawyers were on their feet, objecting, demanding the testimony be stricken. But Marcus wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone. Your Honor, I have a recording of Ms. Martinez explicitly asking me to commit perjury. It was made legally under New York's one-party consent law. The judge leaned forward, approached the bench. Both legal teams scrambled. The recording was played in chambers. When they returned, Elena's face had gone white. The judge allowed the recording into evidence. The courtroom heard Elena's voice, cold and calculating, instructing Marcus to lie under oath. Heard her admit she'd researched him, targeted him, manipulated him. The jury's faces shifted from confusion to disgust. David Kellerman's lawyer was trying not to smile. Elena's legal team was drowning, objecting to everything, but the damage was done. Marcus was given the floor to explain, and he spoke directly to the jury like he was talking to neighbors, to real people who understood what it meant to be backed into a corner by someone with infinite power. I saved her life because it was the right thing to do. She tried to buy my integrity because she doesn't understand that some things can't be purchased. She gave me money, gave me a job, gave my daughter a future, and then she told me the price. Lie for her. Destroy an innocent man to protect her reputation. When I refused, she took it all back. She got my daughter expelled from school. She demoted me to the mailroom. She threatened to destroy me if I didn't become her weapon. But here's what she didn't understand. I jumped into that river because I believe people's lives matter more than fear. And I'm sitting here today for the same reason. Because the truth matters more than comfort. Because doing what's right matters more than keeping what you've been given. The trial continued for 2 more days, but the outcome was inevitable. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found in favor of David Kellerman on all counts. The judge ruled that Elena Martinez had indeed stolen proprietary technology and had engaged in witness tampering and obstruction of justice. Criminal charges would likely follow. Outside the courthouse, Marcus was swarmed by reporters. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved in his face. Questions came from every direction, but one reporter's voice cut through. Mr. Thompson, you gave up $500,000 and your daughter's education to tell the truth. Do you regret it? Marcus thought about Zoe, waiting at Mrs. Patterson's apartment, probably watching this on the news. He smiled. Not for a second. The story went viral within hours. Not the jet crash this time, but something bigger. Hero who refused billionaire bribe. The man who couldn't be bought. Marcus Thompson's name trended on social media. Strangers praised him. Others called him foolish. But the people who mattered, the people who understood what it meant to choose integrity when the cost was everything, they saw him clearly. If you stand with people who choose integrity over money, comment, I stand for truth. Because in a world where billionaires think everything has a price, people like Marcus prove them wrong. Hit subscribe if you believe that. Marcus and Zoe moved back to Brooklyn. Not to their old apartment, that was long gone, but to a similar one 3 blocks away. 2 bedrooms, 4th floor walk-up, bars on the windows, sirens at night. It was smaller than the penthouse, older, with radiators that clanged and neighbors you could hear through the walls. But it was theirs, paid for honestly, and that made all the difference. The first night back, Marcus sat on their second-hand couch and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Relief. He was home, not in a building, but in a life that fit. What happened next surprised him. Someone, a stranger in Ohio, started a GoFundMe. The title was simple, Help the Hero Who Chose Truth. The description told Marcus's story, shared news clips of his testimony, and asked people to support a man who'd sacrificed everything to do what was right. It spread like wildfire. Teachers donated. Construction workers donated. Parents who saw themselves in Marcus's struggle donated. Within 2 weeks, the fund had raised over $200,000. Marcus cried when he saw it, not because of the money, but because it meant he wasn't alone. People he'd never met believed in what he'd done. Job offers came next. Companies that valued integrity over connections reached out. A nonprofit focused on workers' rights offered him a position as an ethics consultant. The salary was modest compared to what Elena had promised, but it was real, earned through his character rather than his usefulness. He accepted. Other things shifted too. Elena Martinez's empire began to crumble under the weight of investigation. Former employees came forward with their own stories of manipulation and abuse. Shareholders lost confidence. The board of Martinez Global requested her resignation, and 3 months after the trial, Elena Martinez stepped down as CEO. Her name, once synonymous with success, became a cautionary tale about power without principle. Marcus didn't celebrate her fall. He felt no satisfaction in watching someone lose everything, even someone who tried to destroy him. But he did feel vindicated. The truth had mattered. Doing the right thing had consequences, yes, but so did doing the wrong thing. And in the end, the consequences found the right person. One evening, after a long day at his new job, Marcus tucked Zoe into bed. She looked up at him with those eyes that saw everything, understood more than a 9-year-old should have to. Dad, are you sad we're not rich anymore? Marcus smoothed her hair back, kissed her forehead, and smiled. Baby, we were never rich. But we're something better. We're free. Zoe thought about that for a moment, then nodded like she understood perfectly. She closed her eyes, safe and loved, and Marcus stayed there watching her breathe until she fell asleep. Later, alone in the kitchen, Marcus turned on the news out of habit. They were running an anniversary segment about the jet crash, showing old footage of the rescue, the chaos, the aftermath. And there, floating in the water among the wreckage, was Elena's torn briefcase. The reporter's voice explained what investigators had later discovered. That briefcase had contained documents related to the technology Elena had stolen, evidence she'd been transporting illegally when the jet went down. Evidence that would have disappeared into the Hudson if the crash had gone differently. Marcus had saved her life that day, but exposing her had saved his own. 6 months passed. Marcus settled into his new role as an ethics consultant for a nonprofit that advocated for workers' rights and corporate accountability. The work was meaningful in a way his job at Martinez Global never had been. He helped people navigate unfair employment situations, spoke at community centers about knowing your worth, and testified before labor boards about the importance of protecting vulnerable workers. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with a corner office or a 6-figure salary. But every night, Marcus went home feeling like he'd done something that mattered. Zoe thrived at her public school in Brooklyn. She made friends with kids from the neighborhood, real friends who came over for sleepovers and didn't care that their apartment was small or that Marcus drove a 15-year-old Honda. She joined the art club, discovered she loved painting, and filled their refrigerator with colorful drawings of families and flowers and birds. She smiled more, laughed easier. The weight she'd been carrying, The pressure of trying to fit into a world that was never meant for them had lifted. She was just a kid again, and that was enough. One afternoon, Marcus came home to find a letter waiting for him, forwarded from the penthouse address he hadn't lived at in months. The envelope was expensive, cream-colored, familiar. No return address, but he knew. He opened it standing in the hallway, and inside was a single sentence written in elegant handwriting. You were right. Some things can't be bought. Thank you for the reminder. Marcus read it twice, then walked to the kitchen and threw it in the trash. He didn't need Elena Martinez's validation. Didn't need her apology or her acknowledgement. He smiled, not because she'd learned something, but because he had. He'd learned that his integrity wasn't negotiable, that his daughter's respect was worth more than any penthouse, and that the only person's approval he needed was his own. That weekend, Marcus took Zoe to the Hudson River. They stood near the spot where the ferry had been that day, the day everything changed. It was a beautiful afternoon, warm and clear, the kind of day that made you grateful to be alive. They brought a bag of bread and fed the ducks that gathered at the water's edge. Zoe threw pieces into the river, laughing when the ducks fought over them, and Marcus stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, feeling more at peace than he had in years. Zoe looked up at him, squinting against the sun. This is where you became a hero, right, Dad? Marcus looked out at the water, remembering the cold, the fear, the moment when he'd chosen to dive instead of standing safe on that ferry. He thought about everything that had come after. The temptation, the fall, the climb back to himself. He knelt down next to Zoe, eye level, and smiled. No, sweetheart. This is where I learned I already was one. They stayed there until the sun started to set, father and daughter, feeding ducks and watching the river flow past, carrying away everything that didn't matter and leaving behind everything that did. If this story moved you, if you believe that ordinary people doing the right thing deserve to be celebrated, subscribe to hear more stories of real heroes. Share this with someone who needs to remember that integrity still matters. And comment below, what would you have done in Marcus's position? Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.